So my interest in the relationship between humankind and the landscape was piqued about 7 or 8 years ago when I began doing some artist residencies in wilderness spaces. And this is the gates of the Arctic. It's the Ula Valley, and this was the night we arrived, and appropriately this space is called Thunder Valley. I also spent some time in the community wildlife refuge, and a lot of time in planes looking at the landscape, and was just enamored with it. It looked very much like an elaborate textile to me, and so I was interested in that. And what you're seeing here are a combination of wetlands, peatlands, and permafrost during the summertime. So during this time, I became aware of the road to Ambler, which was a controversial proposed 220-mile road through these refuges and wildlands and wetlands. And this was to support a copper mine. And two things struck me about it. One was the struggle of the communities in the area to kind of reconcile economic success with preserving a way of life and maintaining healthy outcomes for people and the land. And the second thing was that in my artist's brain, I had this image of the landscape being filled and rolled up like turf. So I began to think about that. And I began to think about the Earth's surface and its function, its protective role. And during this time, it was a high fire season as well. So a lot of the area was charred. And I came up with the idea of creating these mantles. And what you see here is a detail from a mantle called the fireweed birthing mantle. And it references really the relationship between fire and regeneration of the landscape. And you can see the fireweed there floating up, and then just sort of in the background, black spruce trees. And so this is the piece. And I created a series of these mantles using the organic matter from these landscapes. This is the grasslands mantle. So I belong to many communities, and I belong to a community in Mexico. And during this same time, this community, another small community, was also struggling with how to balance economic success with healthy outcomes. And I became very involved in the resistance and response to this. You know, they're basically multinational corporations were coming into this environment, and there were two. There was a mining interest and then a large resort. And the issues at hand for the people living there were primarily water rights and patrimonial rights to have access to their historic resources, and also the destruction of the land. It's critical habitat for migrating marine animals, and also a species of mangrove that's critical in holding the dunes in place and preventing the loss of sands from the coastal area. And this particular area was important because there are very few put-ins and takeouts for fishing vessels, and this particular area has this ability. So the loss of the mangrove was important as well. So I became involved in creating interventions with local people. This is Maree, and we set up this concession stand, and we gave away water for free because it's a human right. And then Maria was able to explain what was happening politically to people. A discussion began, and there were a number of educational activities that were also associated with it. But to be honest, I really thought we just didn't have a chance fighting these, big corporations. They were very powerful. And so what I did was I began to document the landscape and people living there, in a sense, bearing witness and creating a record, a document, an archive of evidence, so to speak. And this was the beginning of a series called the Disappearing Landscapes series. And here you see construction encroaching on the environment. So another community I belong to is in Alaska, and we were experiencing the same kind of thing, blocking off of access to historical trails that were important to the community for a number of reasons, hunting, berry collections, recreation, and just also transportation. These were lines of communication. So I began during this time to create these series called the Shield series, and looking at the shields not only because of their role as protection and defense, but also using a reflective surface to show the integration of the corporeal body as well as the landscape. And it was kind of at this time that I began to recognize how deep the human relationship is with land, that the places we live hold our memories. It's not only linked to our survival as a resource, but there's a real, also strong emotional connection there. And I began to document the disappearance of landscapes that I was familiar with in Alaska as well. This is Donnelly Lake, and it's basically the same ecosystem that was transformed here during the Delta Valley project. So sort of concurrent with this, a theme in my work has been hydrocarbons in the form of petroleum and petroleum culture, and looking at plastics. And this piece is called Tundra Sheaves, and it looks at the passage of carbon through the food chain. Now, this led to a series called the Carbon Bomb, in which I look at ways that we slow bomb the planet with carbon waste. And I find that a lot of times this waste is located in these fringe areas where you have human activity overlapping wilderness spaces. So the opposite end of the landscape, the natural landscape, is really the developed or built landscape. And so I was also looking at what happens when we become disconnected from the landscape in a series called Gray Slavery. And in this series, what I'm doing is looking at the flow of energy through systems that exploit the working poor. Also looking at the architecture and artifacts in these spaces. This is a series of directed performance and installation that I photo document. And it's sort of a measure of the way both labor and the consumer are exploited by these systems. where people are treated somewhat as disposable and commodities. It's an environment that's both sterile and overstimulating and in some sense dehumanizing. So, you know, this is the opposite. This is the extreme end of the human experience when we separate from the environment. So that brings me to where I am at the moment, looking at peatscapes and the human relationship to that in this community in Homer. And I'm going to invite Rika Mao, who is part of the Drawdown group, to talk a little bit about the peatlands in this community.
Wonderful, Sheryl. If you would go ahead and stop screen sharing, we'll transition to Rika's screen. Thank you. That was a beautiful presentation. You're an amazing photographer. I take as much pleasure in seeing your photographs as I do, you know, hearing you speak. Rika, would you like to share your screen at this time?
Sure. First, I would like to thank Sheryl. That was really, really powerful, and what an honor it is to work with you. Okay. Okay. Is this sharing now?
Yeah, just go ahead and hit that presentation mode. Go. You were just hovering over it in the lower left. There it is. Go ahead and go into that mode.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Just to give you a little bit of background on the Homer Drawdown project, it was inspired from this book. We started meeting, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, about October of 2019, pre-pandemic. And we read this book chapter by chapter, and it's just how a smaller group can affect climate mitigation. And so we read each chapter, and at the end of 10, I forget the timing, but after each chapter, we all decided which piece that we'd like to tackle, which chapter we'd like to tackle. And it was pretty clear that we chose peatlands. And from that nascent concept, we have gone quite a long way. It started with a fairly large group of at least 75 people. And it's been a lot of work of trying to figure out how can we focus in, what can we do? Because peatlands is such a huge, huge project. There's advocacy and outreach and education and, you know, partnerships and all that. So it took a while to come to that. And I just want to share, oops, that's not happening. So maybe Asia can bring up.
If you stop your screen share, go ahead and close out of your screen share.
All right. And let me just, while she's doing that, over this time period, we have really collaborated with a lot of different partners, agencies like the Kachemak Conservation Society, the Kachemak National Estuarine Research Reserve, Cook Inlet Keeper, the city, the Homer Soil and Water Conservation District, the college, even the Pratt Museum, and Extension doing work through the Ninilchik Native Village tribe. So, so we've got a lot of partnerships, a lot of broad knowledge coming into this. And the mission statement is to help the world on a local level reach drawdown, the point in the future when levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere stop climbing and start to steadily decline, thereby stopping catastrophic climate change as quickly, safely, and equitably as possible. And Asia, I wonder if you can go to the, like, our project. and what we're doing is community peatland surveys. We're reaching out. Oh, there are presentations every monthly meeting that are put on. Kim McNett is on part of this. She's one of the participants and has led them. She and Bjorn have just been amazing partners in this. And I wonder if you just scroll down, Asia, down. So arts, education, and outreach. We are working towards supporting KHL. That's another partnership, is the Ketchimat Heritage Land Trust, and collaborating with them. And one of our big projects is to raise money to help stewardship into perpetuity for selected peatlands and that partnership. So we're fundraising sort of, but we're also doing peatland surveys, and they're going on right now. Sheryl has been a big part of that. There's also a restoration aspect to it, because peatlands need to stay hydrated in order to continue to sequester carbon. And if you just scroll down one more little, oh, okay. And then we have a peat map. We have a schedule. Asia, if you even go down to the schedule, you'll see that there's Sheryl's talk, and all our meetings are open to the public. And there are schedules all over. We have events, and it's just a big, big community project. It's a community science project, but we are linking with scientists, artists, educators, presenters. Ed Berg is involved. So it's really a pleasure. So in reaching out with Bunnell has really helped us in getting the art aspect out there. And so we've reached out to the city and Bunnell in doing a big mural or mosaic or some art project. We've selected the airport terminal building where we'll install a mural on either side of the entryway. And we chose this idea because the airport is built on peatlands, and it is the highest fossil fuel emitter, being airport transportation and air transportation. So we thought it would be a really good location to educate and help people be aware of peatlands. What we really want to do is put peatlands on the map. They're kind of an under acknowledged landscape, but they're really, really important. 3% of the world is covered in peatlands, and yet second to the ocean, they sequester, second to the ocean, the largest amount of carbon. So they play a huge role in climate change, climate mitigation, and they're gorgeous. And I think that Sheryl will be showing just the complexity that is there. There is so much to see in these peatlands, and we've been walking together along the airport fence and all over. It's just an honor to be working with Sheryl on this and just walking these wetlands and peatlands.
Rika, while you've been talking so eloquently about Drawdown, I've been sharing Bunnell's website, which shows the opportunity for artists to explore our call for proposals for Art for Peat, and that they can apply right there through Bunnell Street Art Center to provide a proposal for a couple of mural opportunities that we are creating in collaboration with the City of Homer with the airport planned renovation project next year. So we have a call for proposals open until September 1st, and folks are welcome to contact us at Bunnell to learn more about this pretty user-friendly application, where we're just seeking ideas from the very broad community of Bunnell painters, mosaic artists, collage or photographers. It's open media. And so, Yeah, this is a really exciting collaboration. We're excited to host this opportunity through Bunnell and help to raise awareness and funds. Shall I close out of this and we'll go back to Sheryl's presentation?
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. You've got some more slides to share with us, Sheryl?
I have. I'll just open my screen share here.
Mm-hmm.
So. Okay, let me just double check. There we go. So this is a two-part residency, and this first half has really been about, for me, learning and research and just exploring the environment. And I've been looking at it from as many angles as I can. And this is from the micro level. This is a little sundew plant, which I'm just enchanted with these. I've never seen these in the north where I live, in the interior. They're just absolutely gorgeous, I think. Gorgeous little carnivores. And the reason they're carnivorous is that this is necessary in order for them to get nitrogen. And because peatlands are somewhat nutrient deficient, there are some nutrient deficiencies, and nitrogen being one of them, because they're basically 50% carbon. So I've been learning about the ecology of this space as well, and the importance not just of the plant and vegetation life, but the wildlife that lives here. And here we have a moose skull that's just disintegrating into the landscape. And this is an important source of calcium for small critters. When I was in Gates of the Arctic, they were emphatic about people not taking antlers or bones or anything, because it is a critical source. And then also it becomes a source of calcium mineralization in the peatland itself. So then stepping back a little bit and looking at the macro picture, and just sort of investigating what some of the challenges are to this landscape. And it seems like one of the major challenges is drying out, as Rika mentioned. And sources for this are climate change, for sure, but also development and draining of the land. And here we have an example of development encroaching on the land. And it makes me think that in a healthy natural environment, you can measure the health of the environment by noting whether there is an apex predator present or not. And that would be like, wolves or lions, just depending on the landscape. But what's happening is increasingly in built landscapes, man is becoming the apex predator. And I just love the serendipity of coming across this image and finding this. Again, looking at some of the challenges, and this is the chain link fence surrounding the airport that Rika mentioned. I love this little spruce, it's holding fast and shaking at the same time. There's a proposal for a road to be built on the airport internal side of this fence in order to help maintain the fence line. But as people have pointed out, you'll be obliterating a certain amount of wetland, and you managed to build the fence without a road. So perhaps you could maintain it without a road as well. Looking at adaptation and resilience. And here we have the juxtaposition of a chocolate lily in a drain. It's adapted to the drainage from its normal wetland habitat, and right next to a transportation system. Another challenge is invasive species into the landscape. So as I was wandering around Homer, I came across a garden center, and here were these piles of turf. And turf is the term that's used often in Ireland to describe peatlands. So I started to look at the language of peatlands and just sort of find out what the origins of it were. And it was pretty interesting. Basically is a Celtic word. And I thought that it probably described the material of the peatland. But in fact, what it does is it describes the piecing and parceling out. So the human action that's connected to this landscape. So part of the research also involved, looking at city planning maps, finding out where these areas were located, what the usage was for them, what the ownership was. And here we have a map of the streams in the area. And I just included this because it felt very corporeal to me. It felt like a body. This could be a muscle. The little image in the bottom could be a pancreas. And so sort of a representation of a living organism. And what we have here is an overlay of land use designated by the city over the top of the wetlands. And we see this division, this dividing up into squares once again. And it seems to me that this historic practice of slicing and cutting peatlands appears deeply embedded in the DNA of the word, but also becomes almost an expectation when we look at city planning maps. The peatland's fate seems to be predetermined by these series of rectangles that are mirrored on the paper. So I had a fun day going out with the Drawdown group. They were doing a training session for people who would lead citizen science research on peatlands. And here you'll notice we've got a grid again. So even, with the best of intentions, when we're studying this environment, we're sort of dividing it up, cutting it and slicing it, in a sense, in order to look at it. And the purpose of these surveys really, I think that it's pretty well known where these lands are, but the big question is, how much carbon do they actually sequester? And the value of that in mitigating climate control, but then also the risk of the lands drying out and that being released into the environment. Kim McNett took me on a tour, and we went to a coastal area where you can see that the peatlands are eroding into the ocean here. And it was curious to me looking at this, just can you see the arrow here pointing at the peatlands, the chunks of the peat as they drop off. But yeah, I didn't notice it at the time. But when I looked in later, I could see that there were these stumps that had been cut off. And I was curious about whether that had happened after the slumping or before the slumping. Yeah, so I'm just kind of curious about that. So here we have a close-up of the peat on the slope. And it's dried out, and it very much has the texture of cardboard to me. Visually, I don't find it particularly interesting. I find the surface a lot more interesting, but I'm just really just kind of exploring it as a material. It is, of course, a fossil fuel. When it's completely compressed, it becomes coal. And actually, I should just kind of go back a little bit. So what the material is, basically, it's vegetation, and mostly in the form of, I'm going to butcher this, but sphagnum, moss. And here we see quite a bit of that moss in this landscape here, along with the treasure of a lot of other vegetation, the spruce, Labrador tea. You can see also berry shrubs there. Despite the fact that it's not a very nutrient-rich subsurface, there's a lot going on the surface, and a lot of nutrient value for the critters on this landscape, but also for humans. And so it leaves me looking at, food sources of the past, and where our primary food sources come from at the moment. And it's notable that to me, almost humorous that we have these organic collected food sources, and we have them sequestered in plastic, a hydrocarbon. So I'm going to just kind of leave us all with that thought. These themes of cutting and slicing, capture and sequester are all fodder for, I hope, some future artwork. And so I'm going to exit out of the peatlands now, and we'll just see what comes out of the mire of my mind in the future. And I'm looking forward to coming back in the fall and working with the community and hopefully bringing some art with me and creating some art. So I'll just get out of my screen share. Am I out of the screen share?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you, Sheryl. That was fantastic. Again, so wonderful hearing, your eloquence and also those beautiful images and projects that support this long-term investigation of yours. We'd love to see your face if you want to.
Oh yes,
back on.
that.
And welcome everybody into the conversation. Kim McNett, I'm so glad to have you with us today. And I'm just wondering, before we transition, I'm sure, into many other points and questions that others might have, what sort of reflections do you have, Kim, about the presentation and the work of an opportunity in collaboration with Drawdown around Sheryl's visit?
Sure, yeah, thank you for the invitation to speak. Thank you so much, Bunnell, for hosting, and Sheryl for coming, and Rika and everyone else who's been involved in the Drawdown project. This truly has been just this incredibly collaborative endeavor. And it's really fortunate for us, I think, that Sheryl has been willing to join on and embrace sort of this community endeavor that's so place-based here, and how well her artistic medium and style has fused with this. I think in reflection on seeing the thoughts that you're developing, first, I just loved that you were wanting to come and just learn and listen first and derive your inspiration from what that environment and the human elements were telling you, and to see you create this this analogy between that slicing up on the small scale to how we divide and think about our land as a commodity on a large scale. And then even showing that grid and making me realize oh my gosh, even it's like this ingrained human nature that we have, right? To compartmentalize. And that's how we're isolating our thoughts with that, and how challenging people to think literally outside the box, literally. I think it's just beautiful, and I look forward to continuing to collaborate. I would also just like to share with folks, you know, we have Sheryl visiting and doing these amazing projects. We have the call for proposals that Bunnell has put out. We're also developing and are going to be releasing soon something that is an invitation for anybody and everybody, no matter your background, no matter your interest, to go have a connection to a peatland, have an experience in a local peatland, and reflect on that in whatever way resonates with you. So if you're a practicing artist or a writer or a poet or a naturalist or whatever it is that speaks to you, a conservationist, or if you would like to just answer the prompts that we will be providing, we're having something called we're calling it a personal peatland survey, and it's extremely accessible to anyone, and it will be hosted on our website in the next couple of weeks. And it's an invitation for anybody and everybody to contribute to our map, both literally and figuratively, of how we know and interact with our local peatlands. So thank you all so much.
I think that's an
Kim.
incredible tool, Kim.
Isn't it? And is it fair to say that peatlands really span Alaska's greater tundra, and the whole system that stitches us together, you know, is one that defines a much bigger space than this small action in Homer? And so I'm pleased that, you know, we have artists from, you know, far away joining us within Alaska today, because there's so many spaces for consideration of the work of Drawdown, right, in Alaska. So Sheryl, would you like to talk more, you know, about your project here in Homer, and how you feel you know, you're positioned for your return in the fall? How do you envision the next stage of your investigation unfolding? Or maybe you need some time to gestate. You've got several months in between. That's got to be a good thing.
And I think that's exactly what I'm going to do is gestate. I'm going to take some of the content that I've been able to collect in the way of photographs. I'm thinking about different ways that I could manifest that, either using projection perhaps as a tool, or creating installation kinds of spaces, and even just taking the material of the land, which I've done before with the mantle series, and perhaps creating a mantelpiece. I'm looking forward to coming back, because not only to create work, but to join the Drawdown group in perhaps an exhibit that shares the work of other artists as well from the community.
That's right. You and I joined Satchel Pandolfino and Jennifer Gibbons, the director of the Pratt Museum, on Wednesday for a tour of the space. And the Pratt Museum is graciously inviting this collaborative Drawdown project to share in the museum space projection that you're considering, and exhibition opportunity and public engagement on the lower level. Right, so we're exploring the idea of an exhibition gallery in the lower level, which features a major installation of your own, and then the opportunity for several other local artists to reflect and share on the work that they're making around peat, because it is, you know, it really is a pervasive theme in subtle and big ways. You know, whether you're considering that beautiful painting that Oceana Wells made for the Drawdown website, I'd love to just see that, small or large. And then I'm really curious, word has it that other artists have been working with peat, making documentation of, you know, the local effort to within Drawdown, that even what predates the organization of Drawdown here. Like Bjorn Olsen has been making beautiful footage of artists, of work of the landscape, and the different kinds of scientific investigations that have been surrounding that. So I'm excited about an opportunity to kind of like bring these things together, right? And we talked about well, Satchel talked about, even just physically making a peat landscape that's actually a cake, and get families and kids there to just look at both the beauty and the vulnerability, and talk more about how it impacts all of us.
Yeah, to really celebrate the landscape.
That's right. This fragile, intricate, highly vulnerable landscape that literally connects all of us. Think about how thin the peat mantle is across the bay in Halibut Cove, for example, with that substantial rocky base, but then the thin mantle of soil on top. And then you go into places like the interior of Alaska where the peat is deeper. Tell us a little bit about the work of the recent peat survey, Kim, and what kind of depths, you were of course there too, Sheryl, what kind of depths were you calculating for the peat when you were up on the hill behind Homer and other places?
I think this is your wheelhouse, Kim.
Okay, sure. So the Ketchimak Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve has been undergoing, the study of peatlands and peatlands related to climate change for many years. There are ongoing projects, and we're very fortunate to have them as advisors, collaborators, protocol design. So this idea that, peatlands, the study of and understanding of peatlands is predominantly within the scientific community. At least this is my interpretation of it. If you want to know about peatlands, you find the scientists and ask them what questions they're asking. And in general, I'd say about our history of understanding climate change as well. It's been largely handled by a particular discipline, the scientific understanding. So one idea of what can we do as a community, and even if we don't have a scientific background or even very much of a scientific interest, is there still a way that we can help with that? And that's where I see this drawdown process as extremely effective, potentially for the reversal of climate destruction, is that it creates an inclusive environment for everybody's understanding and background to have a platform. So for us as organizers, how can we work within the already established, working understanding of peatlands? What type of data should we be collecting? How will that data be managed, and where will it go, and how can it contribute to things like global carbon markets? Well, thankfully, the reserve is here to help us understand. Here's the equipment. This is what we want to know. We want to know how deep it is in all these places so we can learn the percent carbon that's in it in other ways. And then we can understand how much we have and how it's fluctuating in the environment. Okay. And that's great, right? But there are so many other ways that we can learn to interact with and appreciate and respond to and with our landscape. And so a lot, as Sheryl knows, that art speaks to people's hearts and souls, and it creates a sense, like a visceral sense of caring and appreciation. And so I think the fact that we've reached out and we have this incredibly diverse and interdisciplinary project is this hope that we will reach more people than the data and the numbers would reach, right? We can reach people on this other level. And by doing a community science project, we're inviting people out to the landscape. Almost this excuse, like, yes, this data will be useful. Yes, we want to know how deep they are. But yes, also we want to connect people to this landscape and have this sense of buy-in, like you are an active contributor to the outcomes of our understanding and our relationship to these places. So the survey is an opportunity for community engagement, and we're very much designing it in a way that is, where both one of our priorities is we reach all these different places and we reach areas that are particularly threatened as a way that we can draw attention and awareness to them. And then also, how do we facilitate these surveys in a way that is going to reach a variety of different people? And who are those people? Who do we want to connect to the landscape? And what ways will make this most efficient and easier for them to have access to? So a lot of it is building an understanding, but a lot of it also is building awareness and appreciation and affection for. And we hope to, utilize the opportunity of our fundraiser in a similar way. How do we reach certain people with that? How do we reach people with this personal peatland survey? A big part of why I'm excited about that is that it is sort of a counterbalance to the scientific data, which is very standardized. So in order to have a reliable data set, you have to have everyone collecting it in the same way so that it all builds into a database that you can analyze. It doesn't work if everybody does it differently. However, just like thinking outside the grid, a lot of people have extremely valuable things to contribute to this that don't fit within those boxes. So have you been watching a peatland over decades since you've lived here and seen it change? That story matters a lot. Or how did it impact you? How do you want to express the way that you have been changed by this landscape? And so that is sort of this dual opportunity, and to bring that all together to share. Because what I would say about the drawdown philosophy and project and actions is that climate change is very uncertain. It's undetermined. We don't know exactly the best way to respond to this, but we do know that we don't have to do it alone. We have each other and we have our community. We are stronger and more resilient when we are diverse, and we are here to support each other. And so together, we're really entering this unknown. We can't be sure how effective we are. We can't be sure the outcome, but we can be sure that we can be here for each other and that we can help make each other stronger. So thank you all so much for giving me that little platform.
Thank you, Kim. You speak so evocatively about how stewardship is a cultural endeavor, and also the relationship to peat is age old. We have Petra Liszewski joining us today, who grew up in northern Germany. And Petra, I wondered if you could speak briefly, if you would, just about the relationship to peat that from your childhood. How did you perceive peat, and how did you relate to peat, and any impacts or inspiration coming out of the conversation today? Would you like to share?
Sure. I hadn't actually thought about that part of my childhood until listening today. And we used to take walks, and that part of Germany around Hanover and sort of between Hamburg and Hanover and Brunswick is flat. And it had, peat is Torf in German, Torf. And it was a very rural area, and the locals would still cut it for fuel. And I remember it was a very peaceful landscape, and seeing Sheryl's photographs brought that back. And in fact, I have not been there in a long time. And I think the next time I would like to drive up there again, visiting. It's made me curious again. And I do know that, climate change, my goodness, the lack of rain, will destroy those areas. So yeah, that's my memory. So
thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Petra. Your comments reminded me that long relationship to peat, and how that relationship to be better stewards needs to change. I grew up burning coal. We went down to the beach and burned coal, which of course is, I don't know if you'd call it, it's not petrified peat, but it's just highly compressed, very, very old vegetative layers. And the impacts, of course, of burning coal and even wood are greater than heating, environmentally are greater than heating your home with natural gas. And hopefully we'll have and develop much better alternatives for the future. But we are kind of weaning ourselves from cultural habits, histories, and stories, and creating new ones, as Kim pointed out so eloquently today. If there's other comments from our listening audience, they're really welcome. Anybody could paste a comment into the chat or speak up today. Sheryl, are there other images or thoughts too that you wish to share?
I have one thought, and that is that something that I've learned is how complex stewardship is. It's not just a matter of putting a preservation stamp on a piece of land, that with that comes certain responsibilities, and that, you know, change is a part of the natural world as well. And so how much do you interfere with that in your stewardship? How much access do you create to that land, and in that sharing of it with people also impact it, you know, just as something as simple as a trail. You know, do you want to disperse the user group, or do you want to contain them, and so that you're, you know, sacrificing one area for another? Yeah, it's complex. Do you flood an area in order to, you know, combat the dryness or not? Anyway, just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, I'm sure we all have any. If anybody else wishes to share, you know, you're certainly welcome. It's been a really informative hour, and it's also been filled with a lot of inspiration through your creative inquiry, Sheryl. And I'm looking forward to seeing others' responses in September at the Pratt Museum for the Art for Peat exhibit that we're developing. And if anyone has questions, ideas, interest, and participation, please do contact me here at BunnellArts.org. I'd be happy to talk to you more about it. I want to thank everybody for joining this conversation today. It's so important to all of us that it's a diverse participation, and to shift from the burden of scientists to artists, and share the burden of stewardship together is a really important one. So thank you. Any last comments from listeners?
I wanted to just make a comment, just listening to about your work, Sheryl, and your rewilding project, and your last comment about all the complexities involved. Each one of your projects reflects the complexities of an issue and all the impacts of each issue between people and nature. And and it's amazing what a broad reach that you're taking on. At some point, do you envision some way of connecting all these projects, whether it's a publication or?
Annette, you disappeared.
And this project is fabulous. I look forward to it. Yeah.
I lost a little bit of the thread there.
Anyway, I look forward to being part of the, looking at some wetlands. You're taking each project
to answer your initial comment about pulling things together, I think in a sense rewilding does that. Although I'm changing my ideas around rewilding as well, it's become clear to me that the disconnection of the spirit and the physical self from the landscape is sort of an element of losing our humanity. And so the rewilding project that I've been doing is just investigative and thinking about that, and thinking of ways, obviously, to reconnect. And of course, in the context of the pandemic, in a way, it's done so much more than I could have ever imagined, turning those scales upside down and reconnecting people to the environment. It's become a premium in terms of people's life experience. And so it's happening, you know, irregardless of me.